Okay, so yeah, we're live. So greetings, warmest greetings, and welcome everyone to the another episode of our monthly meetup of Kubernetes and Cloud Native Indonesia, which is hosted by Bandung City chapter for this month. So yeah, we actually have two meetups in this month, and the previous one was hosted by Jakarta. And okay. Today, we plan to welcome three amazing speakers, but unfortunately, the second session speaker, Mas Denny, couldn't attend due to urgent personal matters. So we still welcome two really amazing speakers. The first one is Saurabh Gupta. He is the Senior Developer Advocate from DigitalOcean. And then we'll have the second session by Imre, Google Developer Expert at Cloud. That will talk about CloudEvents Spec. And Saurabh will be talking about the security aspects of Kubernetes. Okay, so as usual, we'll start with some community update. Yeah, as we have stated in every meetups, that you can access every recordings in this YouTube channel, and then all the slides are available in our GitHub repository. It's in github.com/cloudnative-id/meetups. You can access all the previous meetup slides there. And then we have, this was our last online meetup, also in the month of August 2020. We had battle, if I'm not mistaken, sorry for that, for the bad spelling, battle from JFrog talking about container pipeline, and then also Yuga talking about the security aspect of Kubernetes using the Go tool. Okay, so we had just finished the KubeCon Cloud NativeCon Europe last week. There were many amazing sessions, keynotes, materials, talks, and then I believe that they will all be uploaded to the CNCF Europe channel. So you definitely want to stay tuned for it. And then, yeah, we actually, perhaps 2 days ago, we just had the newest release of Kubernetes version 1.19. The theme, they have the logo for it. It's accentuate the positive. It means that the release team could release the newest version of Kubernetes amongst other things that happen, in the world recently, and that they cover many things as usual, from the LTS support window, and then storage, to logging, and then to TLS certificate. So I really encourage you all to go to the link for the official blog post, and also the changelog of the version 1.19. Kubernetes also has its own contributor website. So this website is specifically designed for contributor. It has contents ranging from documentation, resources. So yeah, it's designed specifically for those of you who are interested in starting to contribute to the upstream Kubernetes. So yeah, if you're interested in that, you definitely should check this website out. Okay, and then we have, is my sound echoing? Okay, I'll continue. So we have another project joins the CNCF incubating project. The first one is Cortex, which is a storage for Prometheus, and also Thanos, joining the incubating from Sandbox, which is a metric system also based on Prometheus. CNCF also released the thorough report on the cloud native development. So if you are interested in like how many people are implementing cloud native, how are they implementing it, how many companies. Do check this report out. It's thorough and complete. And yeah, CNCF also regularly has their webinars with the varying topics, and then you can also check its past recordings. If you have some free time and wanting to learn, check this out on cncf.io/webinars. And then yeah, the upcoming events and conferences, which all will be virtual, as we have Open Source Summit Europe, which will be on October 26 to 28, and then also KubeCon Cloud Native Con North America in November 17 to 20. And all these conferences and events, since they will all be virtual, their ticket prices will be really cheap, and they will also generously have some diversity scholarships if you are interested in joining these conferences. Okay. So yeah, I think that's all the community update from me, from the community. And without further ado, let's give big hands for the first session, Saurabh Gupta, Senior Developer Advocate from DigitalOcean, with the topic of best practices for securing Kubernetes cluster. Time and stage is all yours.
Hey, I welcome you all for this session and thanks for joining. So let me first share my screen and then we can start. Okay, cool. So yeah, without further ado, let me start this session. So what we're going to talk about is definitely Kubernetes, but this is not a session on Kubernetes, right? I'm trying to explore Kubernetes from a different angle, and that is more from a security perspective. Nowadays, when we talk about containers and container orchestrated tools, everyone is trying to implement them. But do we really put a thought process in what goes behind in implementing this from a security perspective? I know there are a lot of organizations which are kind of emphasizing security aspects a lot, but I think still there is a lot of scope of improvement. And what I have seen working in this domain, I'm trying to share in terms of some of the best practices when you are using a Kubernetes kind of a system in your production or whatever workloads that you run. So with that, I'll start this session, which talks about securing your Kubernetes cluster from potential security threats. So that's a brief intro about myself. I'm Saurabh. I'm basically from India, and I'm a Senior Developer Advocate with DigitalOcean, which is basically a cloud infrastructure provider. And just a brief about me, I have nearly more than a decade of experience, last couple of years working into cloud-based domain. I've been working with capacity of as DevOps engineer and cloud architect, working on latest technologies like Docker, Kubernetes for last, I think, 4 years, 3.5, 4 years. I'm a part of the CNCF Speaker Bureau and also DevOps Institute Ambassadors programs. I'm an ambassador for that. So without further ado, let me start with the session, right? But first of all, let's talk about the agenda. What are we going to discuss in the next couple of, I think, 40 minutes that I'm going to speak about? And then I'll open the floor for question and answers. Any doubts or queries that you have, I'm open to take that. So the agenda for today is, why do we need to secure a Kubernetes cluster, right? What are the potential threats, if any? Second point talks about some of the recent known vulnerabilities, which we call as CVEs in Kubernetes and also the ecosystem. So I'm not only talking about Kubernetes in general, but we know right now it's more of a bigger family, the Kubernetes ecosystem. So there are a lot of tools, especially some of the tools coming from CNCF and then other providers. They might have their own security flaws. So we will talk about them. And then the theme, which is basically some of the best practices, how you can avoid those loopholes, and what security measures you should take while implementing Kubernetes. As a free bonus, I'll also try to give you some common security tools. And definitely there is one more, I'll say, a goodie for all the joinees, which I will disclose at the end from DigitalOcean. So to start with, this session talks about security, right? But then for people who are already from an InfoSec background or working in DevSecOps, I think you people already have some better knowledge than me. I'm still trying to understand more on the security side. I'm not a security consultant. So any suggestions or edits that you feel, definitely always welcome. But then, yeah, for people who are not from this background, I hope this session has a good takeaway at the end and you learn something new. So the need to secure your Kubernetes cluster, right? The why. So I've been talking to a lot of our customers, existing customers, potential customers, a lot of startups. And one of the common themes that I come across is we want to containerize our systems to start with, right? That is the first step. Next step, people who have already achieved the first level is, we have a lot of containers. How do we manage them? Can we go for Kubernetes or a similar platform? Obviously, yes. That's what Kubernetes is meant for. When things go beyond control, Kubernetes is the way to go. But do you keep security in your mind when implementing a Kubernetes-based solution, when architecturing your solution? Is the key thought for the day. Just want to plant that seed in your mind that next time when someone or any of you is planning to implement Kubernetes, you should have these things and the best practices that we talk about at the back of your mind so that you implement security also or bake security also into your Kubernetes cluster. Talking about why. So Kubernetes, I think, has been around for nearly 4+ years or maybe more than that, right? Around 2015, if I remember correctly. Has been progressing a lot. A lot of new revisions have been coming up. But at the same time, a lot of security vulnerabilities have been identified, which we call as CVEs, right? So common vulnerability and exposure. That's mostly a security term. So if you don't understand that, no need to worry about it. But before we start with the CVEs in the ecosystem, this is a general report, just I got a hand of it. So this is a report from NewStack for 2019, not that old report. It's just like maybe a year old. So for all the people who are implementing Kubernetes, right, all the Kubernetes users, security is the top challenge. So if you see, nearly 46% of the people have responded that security would be their biggest challenge while implementing a Kubernetes kind of a solution. So since this is an older report, I assume this could be something like at least half of it, now 50% or more. So definitely that means that security is at the top while implementing a Kubernetes-based solution or approach. So just wanted to give you an idea why I'm talking about security, right? So at least 50% of the people, they feel like while implementing Kubernetes, they are worried about the security aspect. Network and other things being the second most popular ones, right, in terms of concerns. And that's why I have based my theme around Kubernetes security. So if you see, these are just some of the vulnerabilities that have been identified in a Kubernetes-based system. Some of them have been patched already in the latest ones, right? So definitely if you're using the latest Kubernetes cluster, you are safe from these vulnerabilities. But in case you are running one of the older versions, you could still be at potential risk. And we will see that later, how to reduce that kind of a risk. Don't want to get too much into these details because these are mostly security aspects. We want to talk more about the security best practices, but just to give you an idea, right? So this is like CVE 2018, which allows an unauthenticated user to like get admin access on a Rio cluster. So and this CV was given a severity score of 9.8 out of 10. So 9.8 is a like very high severity for a CVE that we are talking about. And this has been patched in the latest versions. But then, yeah, this was one of the initial vulnerabilities that was identified as early as 2018. Coming 2019, there was another vulnerability that has been identified that talks about Kubernetes copy command, right? The cp command. So if compromised, the flaw could allow an attacker to write files to any path on the user's machine, which is basically dangerous. So someone who can exploit this CVE or who is aware of this vulnerability can write files to a path system inside the Kubernetes cluster. Talking us about the vulnerabilities, so in 2018, there's another vulnerability 11253, which we call as basically billion laughs attack kind of a thing, Kubernetes billion laughs. So this basically gives an attacker DOS kind of a attack privilege on Kube API server, a denial of service, right? And similarly, something identified in 2019, 11247. This is more related to your Kube API access. So you see, right, they have been addressed in the later releases once identified. But my point is, Kubernetes is still, as a system, maturing. We still do not know a lot about the ecosystem which is supporting Kubernetes, right? So there could be a lot of code which might potentially be a threat. And there might still be a lot of unidentified vulnerabilities which could be identified later, but can potentially harm your system in the meantime. So all the unknowns, till the time they become a known to us, it's better to be on the safer side. That's what I feel. So 2019, another, this is medium level vulnerability, 9946. It was into the container networking, the CNI interface, right? The port map plugin. So, and if I talk about the ecosystem, I'm not like research too much, but this is mostly I have seen around Istio. So if you know, Istio is a service mesh that we normally use to support Kubernetes, right? So there have been two vulnerabilities identified in Istio. And the next one, 5736. This is basically in runC, right? The OCI runtime for Kubernetes, basically Docker. So, I mean, underlying Kubernetes also uses Docker. So yeah, same. So what I'm trying to emphasize is, be it Kubernetes as a system or the underlying ecosystem, or maybe Docker, these platforms or these solutions are still vulnerable to a lot of security flaws. Some of them have been identified and patched. Some of them we are still not aware of. Maybe we will come to know about these vulnerabilities a bit later. But till that time, we need some kind of a protection in place, right? Some kind of a security check in place. So talking about these vulnerabilities, are you still at risk? So as I said, if you are running your Kubernetes cluster on the latest release, right? Most of them have been identified and patched. So definitely you are not at a risk. Coming from a known security CVE's perspective. The unknown ones, we still don't know, right? So we cannot say whether this the latest release is secure or not. We assume it's the most secured one. So in case you are still at risk, what to do? So some check marks over there. I mean, the first one, if you're still using something like 1.0 to 1.9, stop immediately, update to a latest version. I assume that most of us should be running on one of the latest ones until and unless you have a very specific use case to use an older version. And still, if you are using from something like 1.0 to 1.9 kind of a thing, just make sure that have you been patched for the same, right? And if possible, update to the latest versions which are available. The one that I was talking about, the Kubernetes billion laughter, right? So this has been identified and fixed in Kubernetes versions 11.13 and onward. So upgrade accordingly. So best is to go for the latest one. The vulnerabilities that I was talking about around Istio, they also have been fixed and updated in the latest revisions. So in case you are, I mean, definitely if you're trying to use Kubernetes or the ecosystem, any tool from it, just try to go and check if there are any kind of CVEs attached to it and what versions they have been patched with. And then try to use the latest versions for them, right? Be it Istio, be it Prometheus, or any other tool that you are trying to support along with the Kubernetes ecosystem. Now starting with the theme of the day, which is basically security best practices while designing a Kubernetes cluster, right? So before we just directly jump in, I mean, when as I said, right, when we talk to a lot of customers or people who are trying to implement these kind of solutions, the major approach that I see is if my architecture, the current architecture or the one that you're using, right, or that one that you're designing will support a Kubernetes kind of an approach. Is it like, could it be containerized? That is one priority. And if you're already using container or Docker kind of an approach, how do I implement Kubernetes? So it's more from an implementation perspective. It's more from a API perspective, whether my backend will gel well with this system, whether my all other services will work well, whether the pod can support this kind of a load. So all those discussions is around the current architecture, microservices, how to run services and implement them on pod, how to do a lot of resource utilization on pods, right? But a very less emphasis goes on how do I make my Kubernetes cluster secure? I mean, I have not met a lot of people who talk about security aspect of Kubernetes, right? That while designing, I'm also thinking about security. How do I secure my Kubernetes cluster? So basically, implementation is a priority from a services perspective, how to integrate the different services, how to implement a Dockerized environment, how to run them on a pod, how to scale up your applications, how do I use auto-scaling, auto-healing, those functionalities. But how do I secure Kubernetes is secure. Kubernetes itself gives you a lot of security features that we will see. Am I supposed to make use of it? Am I at least aware of them? This session, I'm trying to just put those kind of thought process in your mind when you next have a discussion about Kubernetes, right? So some of the best practices when we are looking from a container or a Kubernetes kind of an environment. So some of them, they are very specific to Kubernetes. Others, they are more of a general approach, which you can use on a any containerized environment, right? So disable anonymous authentication. All the versions from Kubernetes 1.6 and later allow by default anonymous authentication, right? So you have to disable this. By default, this is allowed. So there is a flag called anonymous auth, and you have to set it as false. So this is one of the basic things. So when you are implementing Kubernetes or you already implemented, right, you need to check this. What version are you running? And by default, this anonymous authentication is set to true. You have to set it and disable it and make it false. The next one talks about access to the API server, right? So disable unauthenticated access to API servers. So what I normally suggest as a best practice is there should be a limited set of people or a specific team. So I'm not sure what kind of a org structure that you follow, but something like a DevOps or a cloud team or the final admin team who manages your infrastructure. They should be the only one who should have final access to the Kubernetes cluster, right? The API server. And in fact, not everyone from them. So suppose in case I have a big DevOps team, there is a dedicated team which is for only automation. And the job of these people is to automate certain tasks using the different tools available. At times, they might not need the access to your cluster. So disable the access and only allow a certain set of users or groups or teams to have access to your API server. And definitely that makes sense, right? API server is basically the core of your Kubernetes cluster. Any unsolicited access over there can be, destroy your cluster or could be bad for your cluster. Next, I talk about admission controllers. So definitely a lot of admission controllers are available from within Kubernetes, and they can be configured to make security in place from a cluster perspective, right? When we're talking about Kubernetes cluster, a lot of admission controllers are there. So just try to have a look and try to tweak them to make your security more tight. RBAC, right? So that's another feature that out of the box is available for, all the latest Kubernetes versions, role-based access control. So this is something similar to what I talked about in terms of unsolicited access to your API server. So based on roles, different teams should be able to access your different components of a cluster, right? So in case you have different clusters or, within a single cluster, if we have different workloads that are running, based on your team or your roles, you can define who can access what kind of a priority. And this is definitely not only applicable to the RBAC policy, not only applicable to Kubernetes, but any kind of a infra setup that you are having, right? Disable public access to your cluster. So definitely that's a no-brainer. Any kind of a public access should be closed to your cluster. Anyone from outside should not be able to access your cluster. The best ways that we talk about is have a bastion host or a jump server in between to log into your cluster and have access to it, nodes. In case you have multiple workloads, or if you are planning to run multiple workloads on your Kubernetes cluster, right? So there would be different kind of workloads. Some would be data sensitive, or I might have customer personal information or details, right? And others could be the normal workloads, could be their transaction access and other things. So segregate sensitive workloads and protect them. So as a part of the entire workload, do not run everything onto a cluster and just dump it. But then, yeah, segregate them, and then based on what do you consider as a sensitive workload versus a non-sensitive workload, try to differentiate between them and then run them on different clusters or different nodes the way you want to. We have option to define network policies, right? So use network policies to limit your container and pod communication. There are different ways how you can align them. You can define your YAML files in terms of network policies to define how inter-pod or inter-container communication happens, right? So that is another way from a network perspective that you can minimize access to different resources, be it within a cluster or a node. Harden your node security, right? So definitely you have to take care of the master. If it's a self-managed Kubernetes, in case it's a managed Kubernetes from the vendor that you are using, they will take care of the master most of the times. So onus of node security falls back to you. Whether you're using a self environment or a managed environment, node is something that you have to manage on your own, right? So just given a couple of steps over there, how to tighten security on your nodes. So first and foremost is ensure that the host is secure and configured correctly. Control network access to sensitive ports. So definitely makes sense, right? And minimize administrative access to Kubernetes nodes. So this is again repetitive of not everyone should have access to the cluster or the nodes, and an RBAC policy should be applied. Kubernetes has this concept of PSPs, or basically pod security policies. So you should utilize and leverage the pod security policies to prevent risky containers or pods from being used, right? So if you're not aware of this PSP, just try to learn more about it and see how you can make best advantage of a pod security policy to make your cluster more secure. Use only trusted authorized container images. So this is one of my favorite points, which I would like to highlight. This is not only from a Kubernetes perspective, right? So forget about Kubernetes. Even if you're not planning to use Kubernetes or you do not have a use case for Kubernetes, I'm sure most of the people are planning to go for container way, right? Most of us are trying to either implement Docker or we have already Dockerized our applications. And that's the way to go. That's the future. So definitely nothing wrong over there. But most of the times when we write a Docker file or when we use a Docker image, right? Unless it's a custom image that I have made, the way we do it, or the way we tend to do it is, I'll define a Docker file and I'll use a from source and I'll use some base image, right? And then on top of that, I'll add my code or my layers. Now, the base image that I'm trying to use, a leverage, and I'm trying to pull belongs to someone else from someone else's repository, right? So the point is, how do you trust a person outside your network to give you 100% secure image? I'm not saying doubt the person or doubt the image, but there are possibilities that it could be infected or injected with some malicious code. Most of the images are trusted, right? And then Docker has this facility of marking the images as secure images. So if case you are following those policies and using secured images, you are on the good side, right? It's all good. But I've seen use cases where clusters or even the infra has been compromised. The reason being someone 2 years back or maybe a long time back who has left the organization right now, right? He's no more with the organization. But he has written some code, some Docker file to create, he has written some Docker file to create an image. And that was basically the base image is faulty. So someone gained access to that faulty image, got inside your system, got into infrastructure, and then misused that infrastructure, right? And it takes a lot of time to figure this out. Because in case your system is compromised, you think it's mostly your fault and you start looking into your components, your applications, your other systems, your machines, your cloud provider, or your in-house services. The slightest thought of that, what could have gone wrong in terms of security compromise, could be as simple as an image that we are using or baking could have a faulty base image never crosses our mind. I mean, I have seen 1 or 2 cases like that in the past, and I have read a lot of similar use cases on different forums, and that's why I want to highlight this at a very high level. So this is not only from a Kubernetes perspective, but more from a container perspective. Always use trusted authorized container images, and this is a facility that is available out of the box from Docker. And then there are a lot of third-party tools which are available, which can scan your images and tell you whether this is an image you should use or not. So now coming back to Kubernetes, yes. So upgrade to the latest Kubernetes version definitely makes sense. The latest one would have all the security flaws and I'll say the vulnerabilities identified, and they would have been patched, right? So definitely upgrading yourself to the latest Kubernetes version makes a lot of sense, until unless you have a very specific dependency on one of the older versions. And in case you're using one of the older versions, make sure that still it's not the one that has been identified with one of the security or the CVEs, right, that we talked about. So within the cluster itself, we have the feature of using resource quotas, right? So you can do resource isolation in terms of CPU and memory usage using quotas. So use that. Use a bastion host. I think this is something that we have already discussed. No direct access to your cluster. Use a jump server or a bastion host in between to secure cluster. Secure your CI/CD pipelines. So I think this feature again comes and talks about the ecosystem in general, right? Nowadays, when we are implementing most of the DevOps tools, the practices that we follow is we will have something like a GitHub or a code base, and then most of the times there would be an integration from a CI/CD perspective. Could be Jenkins or some other tool. I mean, most of the standard is normally Jenkins, but yeah, you can always have some of the CI/CD pipeline. And then you use that CI/CD pipeline to trigger your deployments. Or there could be something like Ansible or Terraform, which are doing the deployments for you. Now, the whole point is everything happens inside the CI/CD pipelines. And if you go through Jenkins, that gives you an inbuilt feature of also having security checkups or security scans in place, right? So the whole point is secure your CI/CD pipelines and make best use of them, because they do have an inbuilt functionality of doing these kind of checks for you. There are a lot of third-party tools which you can include as a part of your CI/CD pipeline, and they will do a scanning in between. So anyone pushes the code will be verified. What kind of images and tools that you are using will be verified as a part of the CI/CD pipeline. And if everything is green, then only it will pass. Otherwise, in case a malicious image has been found, a malicious code has been found, or some other vulnerability has been found, it will red flag that. And even before the code moves to production, you should be able to identify this, that there has been some kind of a security issue in my CI/CD. And then definitely you get time to patch that or fix it up. Otherwise, what will happen is, in case you do not have that kind of an integration, a CI/CD integration, things will directly reach production or whatever environment you use, right? The pre-prod or the prod where you deploy. And then it becomes a bit difficult to identify what happens. Turn on audit logs. So definitely, yes, all kind of auditing should be done. In case there have been an issue, right? How do you figure out what went wrong at what place? So that is the time when audit logs come to your rescue. They tell you what was identified, like what error was identified, what went wrong, what time, what user, what kind of cluster, those kind of details, right? So try to use and depend on audit logs as much as possible. So again, this is more of a general generic practice, not only from a Kubernetes cluster perspective. So we talked about a lot of security features, right? And I think I'm moving to the second section of my presentation today. And what I feel is no one who is watching this session should basically resonate with this idea, right? I have no idea what's going on. So basically we're talking in this CNCF sponsored session about Kubernetes, and we're talking about Kubernetes security. Why security is important? What are some of the best practices to secure your Kubernetes cluster? So assuming it's a virtual session, I assume that no one resonates with this idea. I'll move forward. So some tools for Kubernetes security, right? How to improve your Kubernetes security. And before I go to the next slide and talk about the tools, just want to tell that this is not like a recommendation from my side. What I've tried to done is as I consult with a lot of clients and talk to a lot of people, right? So people like you who are trying to work on security or trying to implement Docker, Kubernetes, those kind of ecosystem. I just get ideas from you. What kind of security tools are you using or planning to use? And the most popular ones that I have heard of, I'm trying to suggest. You might be having some other ideas. You should feel free to go for some other recommendation if it's not there in the list. But these are, I think, some of the most popular tools in the industry. So definitely it makes sense to share them with you. When we're talking about security, what kind of tools are available in the market? So, and again, right, same disclaimer. These are not the top 10, not in that order. It's just that randomly I have picked up a couple of well-known tools and put them. So do not rank them in this order. Definitely not. So there's something like KubeBench, KubeHunter, KubeAudit. So this is a mix of open source as well as proprietary tools, right? KubeXray, and then some of the well-known established names in the security market. So be it Twistlog, NewVector, Aqua Security. So definitely it does a lot of good job over there. When I was talking about image scanning and all, I think Aqua has done a good job. You can definitely try that. It's a paid tool, but then yeah, you can have it run a scan and give you all the vulnerability report for your Docker kind of environment. Then there's Anchor, then there's Clear and StackRox. I think StackRox, I'm not sure if it's an actual startup, but I have heard the name over the last couple of years. But what I have got is they are doing a pretty good job in the market. So yeah, these are some of the recommended tools. If you're watching, I mean, definitely I can share the slides or the deck can be shared with you. But then yeah, in case you want to take a screenshot, feel free to take a screenshot of this. Just pausing there for maybe 10 seconds. Cool. So I think that's what I had at a high level. But let's recap what we have talked in the last half an hour or 40 minutes, right? So let's see what we have been discussing so far around the security and Kubernetes. So quick summary or a recap of what we have been talking, right? So not definitely in that order that we discussed, but then yeah, in general, these are the key highlights that I would like you to take away from this session. So implement continuous security vulnerability scanning. I talked about the tools, right? So a couple of tools who does this job pretty well for you. Security scanning from a, I'll say, image perspective and of the entire application layer as well as your infrastructure layer. So there would be different tools which will do like your application security or on the infra security. So what is the best fit for you? Definitely you can figure it out. Regularly apply security updates to your environment. And this is not, as I said, right, this is more generic statement. This is not only to Kubernetes. In terms of any software or tool that you use could be a potential security threat in case you are using an old version and you are not aware, right? And people might have moved forward the latest one with a security patch. You might still be behind in that race. So make sure in terms of infrastructure, what you run from a software perspective, right? The tools and the software, because nowadays we have a lot of automation, a lot of tools available. It's kind of impossible to keep a track of everything, but then yeah, it's a better option. You can track them, keep what is the latest version, what is a security flaw that has been identified, what is happening in that ecosystem. And if a security flaw or a security CV has been identified, what latest version patches that up, right? And then make sure that your environment is patched to the latest version. Ensure that only authorized images are used in your environment. So yes, again, talking about a container-based system, do ensure that whatever images that you have been using are not like open public images, but authorized and trusted images. Definitely that will reduce the chance of some kind of a potential threat in the future. Create administrative boundaries between resources. So yes, the kind of resources that you use within a Kubernetes cluster, you can have administrative boundaries. And what does that mean is not everyone should have full access to your cluster and all the resources. using RBAC, network policies, PSPs, right? I limit that access to individuals and teams. Who access what and which part of my cluster is something that you should define. I'm sorry. Implement network segmentation. This is again from a network perspective. We talked about network policies. So yeah, that is again an option that is available in Kubernetes, and you should definitely do that to make your cluster more secure. Then there is security context that you can apply. This is again a Kubernetes feature, and you should try to exploit it to the maximum to make your clusters and the pods and containers, whatever application that you run, they are running in a secure environment. Last but not the least, also try to monitor kind of network traffic that is flowing to your cluster, both ingress and egress, right? And then limit unnecessary or insecure communication. So, I mean, times definitely it's very difficult to identify what is secure versus insecure communication, but then using tools and technologies, we can definitely try to have a filter and try to identify potential insecure communication from outside world or within the network and filter them out. So as I said, it's kind of difficult to identify what is a secure versus insecure communication, right? That's again a big topic to talk about. What do you allow within your network? What should I like block? But then, yeah, using the tools that I talked about, using the resources that are available within the Kubernetes ecosystem, the features that Kubernetes gives you out of box, you can try achieving this. So that's a high-level recap of basically a quick summary of what we have been talking. I want to leave you with the thought process of like there is no one way fits all kind of a thing. So since this is your Kubernetes cluster environment, this is your production environment, right? You are the best judge to understand how things work within your own infrastructure, how different applications, how different tools communicate with each other. And then based on that, you can take a security decision. How and what areas should you tighten the security upon? How you can achieve RBAC and other things that we discussed, right? Because I just shared some of the general practices, general best practices, but doesn't mean that they apply to all. In case I do not have like a microservices kind of environment, I have a monolith. So definitely the security architecture for a monolith would be different from a microservices environment where you have a lot of services already running, plus you have everyday new services coming up. So you must choose, but choose wisely, right? So be it. And yeah, food for the day. Think for yourself, don't be a sheep. So everyone is doing it. I should also do it. This is the most popular technology. I should not be left behind. We need this. Definitely yes, but then what are the pros and the cons you should evaluate? I'm not against Kubernetes. I have been using it. I've been earning my bread and butter out of it. So definitely I don't advocate against it. But what I want to bring to your notice is there is also a security angle to it. Just try to understand how security works within a container world. Kubernetes is now not a technology, but it's more of an ecosystem which is still evolving, right? This is where we started discussion. So you need to understand what's the best use case for you, what are the best tools that will work within your environment and within your infrastructure. So yeah, think for yourself, don't be a sheep. And thank you for being a lovely audience. This is me. You can reach out to me. I'm at Twitter. This is my official email ID, right? And I talked about a surprise from DigitalOcean. So all of you who have been watching patiently this session till now definitely should be rewarded. This is a reward, right? In case you want to know more about DigitalOcean, feel free to get in touch with me. And this is a link. So it's http://co/indo. You can use this link to create an account, and what you get is basically free $100 of credit to try DigitalOcean. This is valid for 60 days. So in case you are looking for a cloud-based infrastructure system and you have heard about DigitalOcean from, or you have been recommended DigitalOcean, you still haven't got a chance to try it, this is your chance. Right? So just make a note of this link, or just maybe a screenshot of this link, whatever is good for you. But yes, that brings me towards the end of this session. Thank you. I'm open for questions.
Okay, so thank you so much, Saurabh, for the, I think we all can agree, an amazing presentation, amazing talk. Big applause for Saurabh with all of your clapping emoji on the YouTube comment section. And then, yeah, we'll proceed to the question and answer session.
Sure.
And then the first question came from Giri. So I'll read that out. When CVE patches are out for Kubernetes, is it strongly recommended to patch directly, or we can wait for some period of time in company with huge workloads in Kubernetes cluster? It will not that be easy to upgrade.
Well, that's a pretty good question and a thoughtful. So I'll say there's no direct answer to it. Depends upon the kind of vulnerability that has been identified, right? So as I said, CVE. And these CVEs are scaled from 1 to 10. So if it's a medium level CVE, a vulnerability that you can do with, suppose on a scale of 10, it's like a medium level 5 to 6. Definitely, you can wait for some time and yeah, you can stabilize your workloads and then take a final decision how to upgrade. But something like 9 or 9.8, right? Those are pretty serious vulnerabilities. And since they have been identified, this is now in a public domain. A lot of people who were not aware of it, and these are not good people, right? I'm talking about the bad people who are not aware of this vulnerability, now know that Kubernetes has this vulnerability and they'll try to identify who is using this older versions. In that cases, you have to take an immediate action and maybe upgrade to a latest version as soon as possible.
Okay, so any perhaps continuing responses from Giri? If not, yeah, I'll continue to the next session from Fadil. If we're just using a vendor-managed Kubernetes services, how much concern should we have about the CVE? Some of the vendors also known to lack in implementing newer releases.
Okay, let me put it in a different way. When you are using a vendor-managed Kubernetes, all right, not only Kubernetes, any vendor-managed service, you have a trust on that particular vendor, and that's why you're going through it. I'm sure you might not be having in-house capabilities to manage a self-hosted solution. That's why you are choosing that vendor. But out of all the vendors, you finalized on one of the vendors. The reason being, I trust this vendor. This is good for my pocket and other things. So since you trust this vendor, definitely all the vendors, as far as I know, big or small, as soon as we are aware of a vulnerability and we try to get onto the latest session, get a patched version out of it. So we just wait for the patched version. Once it's there, we also update as soon as possible. And we also inform our customers, right? We send out emails or like shouts in whatever way. We do a lot of public social media notifications that we have upgraded our clusters or whatever is the tool that we are using. Please upgrade. So those notifications are also sent out. So I think vendor managed Kubernetes is a safe option. Yeah.
Okay, great. So the next question again came from Giri. Could you suggest some PSP best practices that we should ideally apply in our pods?
Sure. So in terms of like the best practices, I mean, I was trying to include some of the PSP best practices in this session, but then I thought it's kind of overboarding the time. And then I cut it off at the last moment. I'll say there are a couple of them defined if you go to the Kubernetes IO page, right? They have made a pretty good documentation out of it. So you should follow them. That would be a good way to start with for the PSP policies.
Yeah, okay. So it's from the Kubernetes docs on the security section. Okay. So from Rudy, will there be service interruptions when upgrading to increase security if we want, you know, the ideal zero downtime service level?
So definitely, if I have a cluster which is serving my customers, it's a prod environment, right? And I have only a single cluster. I have not achieved high availability or HA. If I do an upgrade on this cluster, there will definitely be some kind of a downtime involved. And if you want to achieve it through zero downtime, you should have some kind of a HA setup. There should be like multiple clusters, and you might have an active, passive kind of a setup. Or you might do, I mean, the typical way of achieving this is a Brueggemann kind of a deployment models, right? You go in phases, and then you upgrade your clusters. So suppose I have 5 clusters which are all serving my broad customers globally. So I upgrade 2 clusters, and then 3 of them still serve the customers. And then once these 2 are upgraded, then I move to the third one, and then finally the last 2. So I mean, just an example, right? So how do you want to achieve that with zero downtime is your wish. But in case you have high availability in place, one of the clusters going down definitely will not make much impact on your user experience.
Okay, great. So yeah, the last question is from me, because I think that the topic of the security is emerging recently, and then also the upcoming K8s certification from CNCF. But definitely there are a lot of us, including me, that is new to the security aspect of the container and its orchestration. Do you have your favorite or recommended resources, I think, aside from the Kubernetes docs on security?
Yes, so I think from a security perspective, Kubernetes docs are fine, but they are not like, I'll say they're like not very good. But in terms of recommendation, the tools that I mentioned, right, be it StockRox, Aqua Security, and all these security companies, if you go to their site, they have their own blogs, and they talk about how to achieve security in terms of container space or Kubernetes space. So I particularly find them very useful when I'm looking from a security perspective. So that is my go-to place. Normally, I know some of the companies, and I read those documentation over and above. So I subscribe for them whenever there's a new article or something published. I get a notification. I do go and read them. So I think when you're talking about security aspects are the best people. So go to these companies, their sites, they have their own blogs. They will have their employees who blog on Medium and other places. Follow them. Those are the best places to learn from the security expert.
Okay, so engineering blogs from the security companies.
Yes.
Okay.
I mean, that's what I do normally.
Okay, great. So I see that there are no other questions. Also, yeah, this is the first time there are other attendees from India. Hi, everyone. Should there be no other questions? I think I think that's all from the first session. And then, yeah, we thank you. We thank so much for Saurabh for the amazing talk, and also for the free trial credits on the DigitalOcean that we are going to restate on the YouTube. Again, big applause for Saurabh. Thank you so much.
Thank you guys for your time, and it was good having me here. Thank you.
Thank you. It was our pleasure. So let's continue to the second talk, which we plan to be a lightning talk, but I think it will be more extended one, which will be from from Imre, Google Developer Expert on Cloud, which will be discussing on the CloudEvents spec. So yeah, big applause for Imre.
Halo, bisa dengar suara gue nggak, Jos?
Bisa.
Oke. Halo, selamat malam semuanya. Oke. Jadi, I will bring this talk with bahasa. So, but if you still want to follow the talk, it will be written in English. So feel free. So, selamat malam semuanya. Nama gue Imre. Jadi gue adalah salah satu Google Developer Expert di Cloud, dan sekarang juga jadi Cloud Platform Engineer di Gojek. Dan malam ini gue pengen cerita tentang introduction ke CloudEvents. Jadi CloudEvents itu apa? Itu adalah salah satu project CNCF yang mungkin masih stage-nya early, dan itu bisa membantu kalian untuk menyamakan atau menstandarisasi spesifikasi dari event yang kalian kirim atau kalian buat di aplikasi kalian. Oke. Nah, jadi biasanya events itu kalau kita ngomongin tentang either monolith atau distributed system atau berbagai macam aplikasi seperti cloud, biasanya semua itu bisa membuat event. Jadi misalkan kalau kita bikin sebuah bucket di AWS, S3 atau Google Cloud Storage, biasanya akan ada event yang kemudian bisa di-consume oleh seperti Cloud Function atau AWS Lambda dan segala macam. Nah, tapi masalahnya adalah publisher itu dia biasanya bikin event dengan cara mereka sendiri. Akibatnya apa? Ketika ada satu sistem, katakan AWS S3, dia bikin sebuah event, dia punya format sendiri, ada payload sendiri, dan kemudian ada standar sendiri. Kemudian ketika Google Cloud bikin event, mereka juga punya standar sendiri. Nah, permasalahannya di sana, ketika kita pengen punya sebuah sistem yang bisa membaca atau memahami event-event tadi, kita kesulitan, karena terpaksa kita harus membuat banyak adapter untuk banyak event source. Nah, contohnya kayak gini. Kalau sekarang kita ngelihat event grid dari Microsoft, itu dia punya format, ada topik, kemudian ada subject, ada event type, kemudian ada event time, ada ID eventnya juga, dan di sini ada datanya juga. Nah, ini dia adalah format dia sendiri. Ini bukanlah format yang dipakai bareng-bareng oleh provider cloud lain atau mungkin teknologi lain. Kalau kita lihat AWS juga punya. Kalau CloudWatch eventnya bentukannya seperti ini. Dia punya version, kemudian dia juga punya ID, detail type, ada source-nya, apakah dari EC2 atau dari S3 atau dari Route 53 dan segala macam. Dia juga ngasih tahu account, time, region, resources, ARN-nya. Dan kemudian ada detail datanya. Detail itu biasanya lebih ke tentang nama instance-nya atau hal-hal yang relevan dengan event tadi. Sorry, that's from motor. Nah, sementara kalau Google Cloud Function, dia punya format sendiri. Mungkin ini potential future-nya akan kayak gini. Tapi kalau teman-teman lihat di sini ada data, kemudian ada konteks. Data itu adalah apa sih yang terjadi dengan event itu. Misalkan ini adalah eventnya PubSub message, kemudian ada attribute, foobar, kemudian ada message ID, publish time, dan data. Kemudian dia juga punya konteks. Nah, konteks ini mungkin untuk menambah informasi dari event. Misalkan biasanya konteks itu tentang siapa yang ngirim, kemudian waktunya kapan, dan kemudian event type-nya apa, dan segala macam. Tapi biasanya kalau kita ngomongin event, akan ada metadata eventnya sendiri dan akan ada data payloadnya. Ini bisa kita bilang sebagai metadatanya dan ini adalah data event itu sendiri. Nah, sementara itu, Cloud Event itu sebenarnya apa sih? Jadi, Cloud Event itu adalah spesifikasi yang dibuat untuk mendeskripsikan event data dalam cara yang sama. Jadi, kalau seandainya tadi kita ngelihat AWS, kemudian ada Microsoft dan Google punya cara yang berbeda, Cloud Event ini sebenarnya mencoba untuk menyamakan spek tadi supaya konsumer-konsumernya nggak perlu implement berbagai macam adaptor. Nah, jadi yang diinginkan dari Cloud Event ini adalah dia itu pengen ngurangin effort developer untuk bisa ngebaca event dari berbagai macam source atau dari berbagai macam platform atau berbagai macam service. Nah, desain goal sendiri dari Cloud Event ini, dia yang penting ada dua. Yang pertama adalah interoperability. Jadi maksudnya apa? Ketika event itu dikirim dari sebuah sistem lain dia juga bisa mengkonsumsi event tersebut. Jadi dia agree terhadap sebuah protokol. Jadi di poin kedua dibilang dia akan menentukan juga bagaimana event-event tadi dibentuk atau dibungkus dengan protokol tertentu. Jadi misalkan kalau protokolnya adalah HTTP, nanti akan ada header-header tertentu yang sesuai dengan spesifikasi dari Cloud Event. Terus kalau seandainya kita pakai AMQP, mungkin akan ada header-header tertentu yang dikirim bareng dengan datanya atau payloadnya dan segala macam. Begitu juga dengan sistem lain kayak Kafka. Nah, si Cloud Event ini dia harus support JSON. Jadi apapun itu protokolnya atau platformnya, dia harus selalu support JSON. Terus ada non-goal. Jadi ini adalah out of scope dari si Cloud Event. Cloud Event ini dia itu nggak ngatur tentang gimana caranya kita ngebikin event. Jadi function build atau invocation process. Jadi apakah event itu akan dibuat oleh sebuah sistem job atau sistem REST API atau segala macam, dia nggak ngatur, terserah. Yang penting nanti event itu harus follow several specification atau standar. Kemudian dia juga nggak ngatur gimana event itu untuk masing-masing bahasa. Jadi kalau bahasa Go atau Java itu dia nggak ngatur, terserah Java mau implement kayak gimana dan Go mau implement kayak gimana. Yang penting nanti bentukan hasilnya adalah sama. Kemudian akses kontrol sistemnya dia juga nggak ngatur. Jadi misalkan gimana caranya orang itu tahu apakah misalkan kalau kita pakai PubSub kita bisa ngatur IAM rule atau permission apakah sebuah user itu boleh ngakses data PubSub atau enggak. Nah, si Cloud Event dia nggak ngatur akses kontrol. Terus habis itu ada tentang protokol level routing information. Jadi kalau seandainya kayak ada Kafka atau berbagai macam sistem lain, dia nggak masalah mau kayak gimana, yang penting nanti dia ada standar-standar tertentu. Kemudian yang terakhir, out of scope dari cloud event ini sendiri adalah event persistence. Jadi dia nggak peduli event itu mau disimpan dalam bentuk apa, apakah dalam memori atau di dalam database SQL atau NoSQL, dia nggak masalah. Yang penting bentukan event setelah disimpan dan kemudian setelah dibaca. Nah, kemudian sebelum kita lebih jauh tentang cloud event, mungkin ada perbedaan. Jadi mungkin teman-teman atau saya sendiri di kantor sering mencampur adukan antara event dan message. Tapi sebenarnya event dan message ini adalah dua hal yang berbeda. Jadi kalau teman-teman lihat di sini, event itu dia nge-carry fact, dia ngebawa fakta. Jadi dia ngasih tahu apa aja sih yang udah terjadi. Misalkan saya sekarang nelpon. Ketika saya nelpon itu adalah event call. Nah, kemudian dari event call itu ada informasi kapan saya nelpon, yang saya telepon siapa, dan kemudian apa aja yang saya omongin, misalnya kayak gitu. Nah, sementara kalau kita ngomongin tentang message itu dia nge-carry intent. Ketika kita punya event, kemudian event itu punya sebuah tujuan, katakan saya membuat email, create email itu adalah sebuah event. Tapi ketika saya bilang email ini harus dikirim ke si A misalkan, nah itu berubah jadi message karena dia membawa intent. Artinya adalah ketika event itu dikirim, seseorang itu akan expect message-nya tadi akan dibalas. Makanya di sini ada contohnya kalau event carry fact itu, contohnya ada state transition, kemudian ada observe condition, kayak misalkan ada transaction purchase atau apalagi ya, berbagai macam event loh. Kemudian kalau message itu contohnya adalah comment execution, ketika kita nge-run comment, kita punya intent tertentu, kita pengen ngelakuin comment itu terhadap siapa, dan kemudian kita expect ada balasan dari comment tersebut. Nah, kemudian kalau event itu sendiri, event itu dipublish tanpa dia perlu tahu tentang subscribernya siapa atau yang mau dengar eventnya siapa. Jadi kalau seandainya event itu nggak ada orang yang peduli juga, ya udah dia tetap akan ngirim event. Tapi event ini juga bisa punya subscriber atau satu atau banyak subscriber. Jadi event ini nggak terlalu peduli siapa yang akan nge-consume eventnya. Kemudian kalau message directed to handler. Jadi kira-kira kayak gitu. Nah, jadi kalau cloud event itu dia tergolong ke dalam event. Jadi cloud event itu sendiri dia cuma membawa fact apa sih yang udah kejadian di dalam sistem, kemudian dia akan publish event tersebut, kemudian dia bisa bilang bahwa hey, in broker system kayak katakan Apache Kafka atau PubSub, gue udah punya event, silahkan kalau ada orang-orang atau sistem-sistem di luar sana yang tertarik untuk tahu eventnya apa, silahkan subscribe. Jadi dia nggak terlalu peduli dengan siapa aja yang subscribe. Selama eventnya udah dikirim, ya udah tugas dia selesai. Jadi cloud event itu specifically ngatur gimana tentang data itu dibentuk. Nah, jadi cloud event itu nggak menentukan beberapa hal ini, contohnya kayak dia nggak ngasih tahu event ini akan dikirim ke siapa. Kemudian reply to, setelah event itu diterima ke seorang, dia tuh nggak perlu tahu balasannya kayak gimana. Makanya di sini nggak ada informasi tentang reply to. Kalau misalkan saya ngirim email ke si B misalkan, kemudian saya bisa bilang kan ke si B bahwa reply to-nya adalah saya lagi, atau si C atau si D dan segala macam. Kalau event nggak, eventnya adalah email send, tapi ketika dia message, saya akan ngasih tahu message ini dikirim ke sini, dan kalau pengen balas, silahkan balas ke saya, kira-kira gitu. Terus ada topik. Cloud event ini nggak ngatur tentang topik, jadi terserah, karena topik ini biasanya mungkin tightly coupled dengan teknologi-teknologi broker. Misalkan kalau kayak PubSub, dia punya mekanisme topik sendiri, kalau Kafka dia punya mekanisme topik sendiri, dan kalau cloud event ini dia nggak peduli, yang penting dia cuma eventnya itu mau dikirim ke satu topik atau banyak topik, itu terserah, itu nggak ada masalah. Nah, kemudian kalau dari segi format, saya minum bentar. Jadi semua implementasi dari cloud event, katakan Kafka, PubSub, atau MQTT, dan lain-lain, itu harus support JSON. Kemudian Avro juga disupport untuk file-file yang sifatnya binary, data yang binary. Kemudian di sebelah kanan ini ada contoh tentang spek cloud event in general. Jadi ada spec version, ada type, ada source, ada subject, ada ID, time. Kemudian ini ada extension, example extension, ada extension lagi, dan kemudian ada data content type, kemudian ada data. Nah, kita akan coba bahas satu-satu. Jadi spec version. Spec version ini untuk ngasih tahu ke penerima bahwa spek yang lagi dipakai, spek dari Cloud Event yang dipakai itu adalah versi berapa. Jadi kalau dalam contoh ini adalah versi 1.0. Jadi ini bukan spek dari si aplikasi, tapi ini lebih ke spek si Cloud Event. Kenapa dibikin kayak gini? Karena misalkan nanti ketika Cloud Event punya field baru atau standar baru, dia akan punya spek version yang berbeda. Mungkin 1.1, 1.2, 2.0, dan seterusnya. Nah, spek version ini lagi-lagi adalah punyanya Cloud Event, bukan punyanya si sistem. Kalau punyanya si sistem, katakan backend saya ngirim event, terus kemudian ada event version. Itu nggak ditaruh di spec version, tapi mungkin ditaruh di data atau di tempat lain. Kemudian yang kedua, ada type. Type ini sebenarnya infonya tentang tipe dari event. Misalkan gini, kalau seandainya saya bikin pull request di GitHub, kemudian ketika saya klik submit pull request, kemudian sebenarnya GitHub itu akan bikin event yang namanya pull request open. Nah, di sini, di type ini, dia akan ngasih tahu event type-nya apa. Tapi biasanya ini akan di-append dengan informasi seperti domain, untuk ngasih tahu bahwa, oh, ketika ada pull request open, ini yang terjadi di github.com. Karena kalau kita punya sistem lain kayak GitLab, misalkan kayak gitu, kan kalau seandainya kita nerima event, kita jadi nggak tahu apakah event pull request ini terjadi di GitHub, di GitLab, atau di Google Source Code Repository, atau segala macam. Jadi makanya di sini standar yang diperlukan adalah kita akan ngasih tahu nama eventnya apa, kemudian di depannya biasanya kita tambahkan dengan domain dari mungkin produk atau company kita. Contohnya di sini adalah com GitHub pull request open. Dan formatnya di sini kayak gini, kayak domain gitu. Dan contoh kedua misalkan com.imrenagi.donation created. Jadi kalau misalkan kalian donate di website gue misalkan kayak gitu, nah nanti akan ada event yang kebikin namanya donation created. Tapi buat ngasih tahu bahwa event itu terjadi di imrenagi.com, ditambahin com.imrenagi. Karena ada beberapa platform lain juga yang bisa menerima donasi kan. Jadi biar kita tahu, oh ternyata event ini, type ini terjadi di platform mana. Kira-kira kayak gitu. Yang ketiga adalah source. Nah, source ini formatnya URL. Jadi ini untuk identify konteks dari event tersebut, atau organisasi apa yang memproses event, yang nge-publish event tersebut. Contohnya kayak gini. Kalau di sini teman-teman lihat contohnya itu adalah github.com/cloud-event/spec/pull, misalkan kayak gitu. Nah, dia ngasih tahu bahwa type tadi com.github pull request open itu source-nya adalah di repo ini. Jadi misalkan kalau teman-teman lihat github.com/cloud-event/spec itu adalah repo. Kemudian itu /pull adalah page dari pull request. Dia ngasih tahu event pull request open tadi terjadi ketika orang lagi buka page ini. Makanya formatnya adalah URI. Mungkin ada format lain juga kayak URN, kemudian ada endpoint juga, cloud event/spec/pull 123 itu bisa juga. Kemudian ada path lain, atau mungkin ada, ini kayaknya kayak phone number. Ini phone number. Kalian bisa pakai juga seperti phone number dan lain-lain. Tapi intinya adalah type itu tadi buat ngasih tahu in general eventnya apa, tapi source untuk ngasih tahu eventnya itu terjadi specifically di mana. Kira-kira kayak gitu. Kita ke sini dulu, ke ID. Jadi ID ini standar, ini uniquely identified. Jadi buat nentuin event ini ID-nya apa supaya unik. Kemudian ada time juga, ini RFC 3339, tapi opsional. Dan ini adalah timestamp di mana event ini kejadian. Jadi misalkan ketika event pull request tadi dibuka, ada waktu kejadiannya kan. Nah, itu akan disimpan di dalam time. Kira-kira kayak gitu. Kemudian ada subject. Subject ini lebih ke siapa yang dikenakan event tersebut. Jadi misalkan eventnya adalah pull request open. Ketika kita buka pull request, yang kita pengen tahu pull request-nya seperti apa, yang asli. Nah, berarti subjeknya itu adalah pull request yang baru dibikin. Dalam hal ini, subjek 123 ini adalah ID dari pull request. Jadi kalau biasanya kita bikin pull request di GitHub, github.com/cloudevents/spec/pool, kemudian ada ID-nya. Dalam case ini 1, 2, 3 itu adalah subjeknya dan ID dari pull request. Oke. Nah, sekarang kita masuk ke bagian yang penting banget. Nggak penting banget juga sih, tapi relatively important untuk masing-masing use case. Jadi ada 2. Yang pertama ada data content type. Ini data content type buat ngasih tahu data yang kita kirim di dalam field data ini itu formatnya apa. Jadi misalkan kalau di sini formatnya adalah text/XML, ya nanti di dalam data ini formatnya adalah XML. Kalau kita kasih di sini application/JSON, berarti nanti format di dalam data ini juga adalah JSON. Mungkin ada format-format lain kalau apalagi ya teks HTML dan lain-lain, berarti formatnya nanti adalah HTML. Itu bisa ditentukan di sini. Tapi kira-kira data content dan data content type dan data itu harus ada dua-duanya. Walaupun di sini opsional, tapi biasanya kalau seandainya kita punya data, bagian ini adalah yang paling penting karena ini akan ngasih tahu tentang eventnya itu detailnya seperti apa. Kalau ada informasi lain, misalkan di dalam ketika pull request ini di open, kita pengen tahu creator-nya siapa, kemudian apakah dia punya deskripsi dari pull request, apakah punya title, kemudian ada berapa file yang dirubah, itu bisa semuanya disimpan di dalam data. Jadi itu nggak disimpan di root dari objeknya, tapi disimpan di dalam data. Jadi ini adalah contoh dari Cloud Event Payload. Jadi kayaknya dikirim ke endpoint/event github.com. Kemudian content type-nya adalah application/cloudevents/JSON. Sorry. Dan ini sama persis kayak yang udah kita bahas tadi. Dan di sini ada data, item ID, kemudian creator name-nya siapa. Mungkin kalau ini pull request ya, benar kan ada creator name. Mungkin ada ID-nya juga. Kemudian ada macam-macam, ada deskripsi, title, dan segala macam. Mungkin nanti ketika ada komen, kayaknya komen enggak sih, karena komen itu komen created, itu beda event lagi. Tapi kalau pull request open, ya udah ketika kalian buka pull request belum ada komen, berarti event dari pull request open dengan event dari comment created itu beda lagi. Terus kalau ada comment replied itu beda event lagi. Jadi makanya di sini ada type buat specifically ngasih tahu eventnya itu apa, apakah pull request open, pull request commented, atau pull request close, pull request merge, dan segala macam. Itu di-define di tag. Nah, ini beberapa referensi. Ada Cloud Event Primer, Spec, ini GitHub semua, dan ada satu video dari KubeCon tahun lalu tentang Cloud Event. Cloud Event ini relatif baru ketimbang proyek-proyek CNCF yang lain. Dan sebelum saya akhiri, ada beberapa hal yang pengen saya tunjukin. Jadi ini ada grup Cloud Event, teman-teman tinggal buka kalau pengen lihat codingannya seperti apa. Dan kemudian ada SDK Go. Jadi untuk masing-masing bahasa kayak Go, kemudian apa lagi ya, JavaScript atau mungkin Java dan lain-lain, itu mereka punya SDK sendiri. Jadi tinggal pakai. Di sini dia ngasih tahu gimana caranya kita bikin klien, kemudian cara bikin eventnya kayak gimana. Ini kita bikin event, kemudian kita set source, set type, kemudian kita set datanya juga. Ini biasanya bisa map atau bisa interface, empty interface juga. Dan kemudian di sini kita set. Nah, pertanyaannya adalah kalau seandainya klien kita adalah Kafka atau PubSub atau MQTT atau lain-lain, itu kliennya gimana? Jadi si Cloud Events ini dia punya beberapa klien. Kalau seandainya kita pengen pakai default client juga bisa, tapi kalau kita pengen spesifik ke vendor tertentu atau teknologi tertentu, mereka punya sampel di sini. Di sini ada beberapa AMQP, Go Channel, HTTP, Kafka, NATS, PubSub, Stan. Kita coba buka PubSub, punyanya Google. Kemudian di sini ada beberapa contoh juga gimana caranya mereka ngirim, cara nerima. Saya coba buka kalau ngirim. Jadi sebenarnya kalau kita lihat di sini, yang dilakukan adalah mereka itu akan pakai API yang sama untuk ngebikin event. Kemudian mereka juga akan pakai API yang sama untuk ngirim event. Jadi kalau seandainya kita pengen ngirim pakai PubSub, nanti kita juga tetap pakai c.send. Kalau kita ngirim pakai Kafka, c.send juga. Terus yang ngebedainnya di mana? Jadi, kalau teman-teman pernah pakai Google Cloud PubSub, itu mereka punya sesuatu yang namanya Project ID, kemudian ada Topic ID, kemudian Subscription ID, dan segala macam. Nah, untuk bisa mengakses PubSub, itu juga ada kredensial, kayak berupa service account key. Nah, yang dilakukan oleh Cloud Event ini, mereka sebenarnya mengabstraksi si PubSub dan berbagai macam broker lain supaya orang itu cukup satu interface doang. Makanya di sini kalau kita lihat, di sini dia akan bikin sebuah klien dari PubSub. Dia bikin di sini si PubSub, kayaknya si PubSub ini, ya ini adalah SDK-nya Google. Ya ini adalah SDK dari si Cloud Event PubSub yang udah mereka wrap. Kemudian di dalamnya kalau saya nanti kita buka di sini, itu mereka akan pakai SDK-nya dari PubSub yang dibuat oleh Google langsung. Nah, terus di sini ketika mereka udah bikin instance ini, yang mereka lakukan adalah mereka bikin Cloud Event client, kemudian nge-inject si mungkin sistem atau client atau dependency yang udah dibikin ke dalam new client. Nah, di sini dia juga bisa ngasih beberapa option kayak Cloud Event with time now, kemudian Cloud Event with UUID, dan kemudian di sini kita punya client. Setelah kita punya client, nanti client ini yang akan kita pakai untuk mengirim event di sini yang udah kita buat. Jadi kalau di sini contohnya type-nya adalah Cloud Event sample send, kemudian source-nya adalah di sini. Jadi kalau teman-teman lihat, source-nya itu adalah github.com/Cloud Event SDK sample PubSub sender. Itu sama persis kayak yang di sini. Mungkin di sini kali ya. Sampai di sini. Itu kira-kira kayak gitu bentukannya. Kemudian ini adalah data. Jadi datanya ini di sini dia cuma bikin ada sequence dan ada message, dan ini datanya yang simple. Kalau seandainya datanya lebih complicated, itu harusnya juga nggak ada masalah. Karena di sini kayaknya si set data ini dia beneran dia nerima IO reader. Jadi selama si struct-nya itu nggak implement method dari IO reader, iya benar, dia bisa ngirim datanya langsung. Kayaknya, ini bisa ada set data, kemudian di sini juga ada set data. Ini dia yang dipakai. Set data content type string, dia ngasih tahu application JSON, dan kemudian dia nerima empty interface example. Jadi kira-kira kayak gitu. Kalau seandainya kita lihat contoh lain, itu akan sama, tapi bedanya nanti cara dia nge-instantiate dari kliennya. Kalau di sini dia pakai Cloud Event PubSub, kalau Kafka mungkin nanti CE Kafka, CE MTP, dan segala macam. Kira-kira itu aja. Saya nggak punya topik lain. Sebenarnya ini dirancang untuk light talk, tapi udah 20 menit juga. Dari saya itu aja. Kalau ada pertanyaan, silahkan. Terima kasih. Ya.
Oke, bentar, saya nyalain lampu dulu. Nah, udah ada beberapa pertanyaan nih Mas. Yang pertama baru satu sih dari Mas Giri. Cloud provider atau project yang sudah implementasi Cloud Event Spec ini mana aja ya?
Oke, setahu saya ada beberapa. Yang pertama itu Microsoft, karena kalau saya tadi teman-teman lihat data yang saya tampilin di pertama punya Microsoft Event Grid itu udah Cloud Event compatible. Yang kedua itu kalau nggak salah SAP, karena dia juga sempat share tentang Cloud Event di KubeCon, dan mereka kasih tahu gimana caranya mereka pakai Cloud Event untuk customer facing product mereka. Jadi misalkan kayak ketika orang bikin purchase atau ngebayar billing dan segala macam, itu mereka udah pakai Cloud Event. Kira-kira kayak gitu.
Oh iya Mas, bentar. Berarti bisa kita simpulin si Cloud Event ini kayak dia mencoba buat menstandarisasi kayak beberapa variety dari event yang ada, terus mereka bikin kayak standarisasinya itu sendiri ya Mas?
Ya betul. Nah, jadi sebenarnya dia bikin standar supaya Cloud Event ini bisa dipakai oleh semua orang supaya nanti eventnya satu bentuk doang. Dan ketika ada event dari satu tempat ke tempat lain, kemudian dipas lagi ke tempat lain, mereka tetap bisa pakai event yang sama.
Oke. SDK-nya saya tadi lihat udah lumayan banyak juga, ada dari Go, Java, JavaScript, even Rust pun ada. Jadi menarik sekali nih kayak buat dicoba. Oh ya, by the way, dia tuh support sama apa protobuf gitu nggak sih Mas? Kalau misalnya event kayak gitu-gitu? Atau binary?
Gue nggak tahu sih state-nya sekarang. Tapi kayak yang tadi di slide, terakhir gue cek yang di support itu untuk binary itu baru Afro. Mungkin protobuf mereka lagi progress kali ya, tapi gue belum tahu.
Oke. Bentar. Sepertinya masih echo nggak? Sepertinya udah nggak ada pertanyaan lagi, so mungkin terima kasih Mas.
Thank you Bang, thank you semuanya.
Udah nyempetin waktunya dan sharing tentang teknologi CloudEvent ini yang sangat menarik. Saya juga lagi belajar tentang per-eventan ini. So ya, terima kasih, dan ya buat teman-teman kasih applause buat Mas Imri, dan ya terima kasih Mas.
Oke Bang.
Oke. Tes. So kita masuk ke ada ke announcements. Jadi kita udah sampai di penghujung acara nih teman-teman. Jadi ada beberapa announcement. Yang pertama, kalau misalnya teman-teman kalau misalnya teman-teman punya meetup topik yang kira-kira pengen dibahas atau enggak, mungkin teman-teman juga pengen ngisi dari perusahaannya atau proyek-proyek yang pengen dibahas gitu di monthly meetup kita, langsung aja submit ke repository dari Cloud Native ID. Dan di sini kita mau update juga tentang localization. Jadi kita aktif buat nge-translate dokumentasi dari Kubernetes. Kita sampai hari ini udah 135 page yang udah kita translate, dan ada 56 kontributor pada saat ini. Kayak ini udah belum diupdate. Dan rata-rata mereka adalah first time contributor, dan ya sampai saat ini kita udah ngehimpun kurang lebih 186 pull request dan 7.000 view dari dokumentasi dalam bahasa Indonesia. Dan kalau misalnya teman-teman tertarik, langsung aja join ke isu yang udah dibuat. Sekarang udah sampai phase keempat. Jadi ini isu trackingnya, linknya di bit.ly/k8s/desdocs-id-m4. Dan buat teman-teman yang mungkin juga pengen nanya tentang translation itu kayak gimana, kita juga punya Google Groups, dan juga ada Slack channel di langsung gabung aja ke hashtag Kubernetes-docs-id. Nah, terakhir buat teman-teman yang mungkin belum join ke Telegram Kubernetes, kita aktif di Telegram. Jadi buat teman-teman yang mungkin mau nanya-nanya masalah teknologi Cloud Native dan Kubernetes, langsung aja join ke t.me/Kubernetes Indonesia. Dan buat meetup page, kita saat ini udah ada di 3 kota, yaitu di Jakarta, di Yogyakarta, dan di Bandung. So buat teman-teman yang mungkin punya saran juga, kira-kira pengen nih buka di kotanya teman-teman, nanti mungkin teman-teman bisa langsung coba untuk nge-open issue di GitHub kita di github.com/cloudnative-id/meetup. Nah, di sini juga kita biasanya nyimpan materi seperti kayak slide-nya, talk-nya, videonya, kita biasanya dokumentasiin di situ. So ya mungkin itu aja dari saya dan tim. Semoga kita cepat bisa nantinya ngumpul offline lagi, dan ya sampai jumpa di event selanjutnya. Terima kasih teman-teman.